Hi, Phil here from Revive My Ride, and in this video I'm going to show you how to double flare a brake pipe, and I'm going to be using a handheld flaring tool to do this. And before we even get started, you need to make sure these two match. So this is 3/16 brake pipe, 4.76mm, and of course this is a 3/16 flaring tool to go with it. So I've got a length of Cupro Nickel tubing here. That's the correct size, 3/16 that I mentioned earlier. And to get the best possible results when you're flaring the end of a piece of tube, it needs to be cut off nice and square, and also without any scoring on the outside of the tube. And the best way to achieve this is to cut it off with a dedicated pipe cutter. So this is just one that you would use for plumbing in your house for cutting 15mm copper, but it works really well on these brake lines as well. And just in case you haven't used one of these before, all you do is open it up until it's big enough for the pipe to fit in, and then you start tightening it until this thumb screw gets a little bit tight, like that, and then you just spin it around, usually just over a turn, and then you come back and you tighten up the thumb screw a little bit, spin it around, come back a little bit, tighten the thumb screw up a little bit. So you're starting to get the picture now, and eventually it'll cut the little length of pipe off and it'll be a nice neat cut. Now sometimes when you're working on your car, you might not have space to get that in, and so you might use a Dremel, or you might use a little junior hacksaw to cut that off. But if you do, invariably that won't be as tidy a finish, and any scores in the end of that pipe might cause your flare to fail. So in that sort of situation, you would actually just file a small chamfer all the way around the outside of that pipe. And then regarding the inside, if you see any burring inside the tube, a lot of files have a triangular or a hexagonal shape on the shaft, and if you get the right one, you can just insert that into the end and then just twist it around, and that'll clean up the internal of the brake pipe quite easily. Okay, so this is my handheld flaring tool which I introduced earlier, and this particular one's made by Franklin, and it's a really good quality tool. So to use this flaring tool, you'll need a couple of hand tools to go with it. So this particular one needs a 10mm spanner and a 16mm socket, and that's it. Everything else comes in the kit. So let's get started. So the first thing is loosen up these two bolts that hold the flaring tool shut, and that'll allow you to insert the length of tube from one end. And the end that you insert it into is the narrow one, because the other end has a much bigger thread on it, which I'll explain in a minute. And now that you've got that pipe all the way through, just pull it back a little bit, you know, say so it's recessed by about, say, 10mm. And then these two 10mm screws that hold the clamp shut, just do them up finger tight. Okay, so here's the first piece from our kit that we're going to use, and it's literally just a stop until it's about 5mm from the end. And with that done, we just put a little bit more tension on these, but not very much, just a couple of turns, so they're still pretty loose, are those. Now we've got our 16mm socket, and all we're going to do is screw that stop in the rest of the way. And all this is doing, all this messing around, is getting that piece of pipe, the end of it, in the tool in the exact correct position. And we screw the stop in until it's completely home. Now we can finally tighten up those two clamp bolts pretty tight. A couple of turns on that one, a couple of turns on the other one, so it's clamping up nice and evenly. Okay, now with that done, we can back off the stop because it's not required any longer. Now if you've done all this process correctly, this brake pipe will be clamped really solid, and the end of it will be in the perfect position. But one of the things that can go wrong is if you had those a little bit too tight, when you screwed the stop in from the end, it could have damaged the end of your brake pipe. So it's really easy at this stage just to have a look and verify. So you can tell by looking in there that the end of the brake pipe is fine and it's not deformed or squashed at all. We're ready to start forming the flare, and this is our punch, and as you can see it has two ends to it. And the first thing I'm going to do is just clean the end of this punch, just to make sure there's not any dirt or debris on it. And then once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to put some special punch grease on the end. And yes, the container does say special punch grease on it. Oh, and do not eat as well, just in case you were wondering. And the first end that I'm going to use, and it'll be different on different instructions, but this says OP1 on it and it's pointing to that end. So in your instructions and on your punch it'll tell you which one to use first, and in this case it's that one. And I'm just going to put a little bit of the punch grease on. And this is actually really important because potentially your flare won't get created properly if there's not lubrication on the punch. And so the first end we can insert into our device now. And what you'll find is it stops a little bit short once you've turned it in finger tight. And so at this stage you can get your 16mm socket on your ratchet and then just screw it in the rest of the way. Okay, and eventually that'll hit the end stop, and at that point, you guessed it, we just reverse it. And now, you've probably guessed, we just turn the device around and it's time to use the second side. Similar process, just going to clean that up, put a little bit of the punch grease on and then insert it into the flaring tool. And also similarly to before, it'll stop just a few millimeters short. And so back to our ratchet again until it reaches the stop. Then we reverse our ratchet, take the forming piece out again. But let's have a look at the double flare we've created. And what you'll want to do is back these off a long way, because if you don't back it off far enough and you try to remove that out, you might damage the flare that you've just created. Okay, so that's the flare that we've managed to create. Okay, so that's how to DIY double flare a brake pipe, and how to use a handheld double flare tool to do it. I hope it's given you the information you need to do your own brake pipe replacement, but if you've got any questions or comments at all, put them in the comments section below and I'll try to help if I can. And if you found this video useful, please consider subscribing and maybe I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, catch you next time.